child, I was terrified of the dark. And like all children, I totally believed in ghosts. But then I grew up and grew out of such silly notions. Because it is all nonsense, isn't it? Everything has a rational explanation, doesn't it? But there's a new interest in the psychic. Clairvoyance is the new cool. Paranormal is the new pashmina. And even celebrities are willing to talk about strange things in their lives that defy rational explanation.
The arm came round me again and went, no, no, it really is all right. Well, how do you deny that? I'm sorry to get upset, but you just can't deny it, can you?
I have such disrespect with psychics that try and pull me in by saying I have a message from the other side for you. My instant reaction is off.
Psychics and mediums, myself always being a large or an extra large, it's sort of hard for me to squeeze into a medium.
I can't remember what she did, if it was a crystal ball or the tea leaves on my palms, whatever it was. She told me things that I still thought were cobblers.
We have some American friends who live in Dallas, and they were over here last year in August and September, and their route back would have taken them via Boston, and they would have been on the Boston plane that went into the Twin Towers.
Families sometimes share telepathic communication links between each other. Funny, my mother always thought I'd know when she wanted a cup of tea.
When my dad was alive, strange things used to happen between him and his mother, and also between my sister, who's 5 years older than me, and him. You know, bizarre things like he'd be driving around the West End, this was like in the 60s, and suddenly driving around the West End 6 o'clock in the evening, and gets out of the car and parks it and goes into a tobacconist shop and buys 2 Mars bars.
I've always been more of a fruit and nut man myself.
He gets back into the car and sort of goes, I don't really feel like those now. Chucks them into the glove box, gets home at about 10 o'clock in the evening. My mum's there, and he comes in and says, I've got 2 Mars bars.
Just calling on my telepathic powers.
And she said, that's so weird, because Sharon, my sister, and I were watching television at about 6 o'clock. An advert came on for those Mars bars, and she said, oh, I wish somebody had come in with a Mars bar.
But Richard O'Brien discovered telepathy across 6,000 miles.
I was sitting and I was writing some lyrics on the back of a brown paper envelope about that size and scribbling away, and I suddenly went, Pauline Osborne. Good God, why did I say Pauline Osborne? Where did that come from? She was my teenage girlfriend. I hadn't seen her for 37 years or spoken to her, had no contact with her. I didn't know where she lived on the planet. And I drew a little picture of her in the corner of the envelope and went, yeah, that's how I remember Pauline. Remember, it's 37 years since I've spoken to this person and had any conversation about her. And at 1:30 in the morning, the telephone rang and a voice said, I bet you'd like to know who this is. I said, New Zealand. She said, you got that right. She said, it's Pauline. I said, Pauline Osborne? And she went, thank you. I said, God, I just said your name out loud at 4:30 this afternoon and drew a little picture of you on the side of a piece of paper, on the side of my envelope. I said, I can't believe this. So at 4:30 that afternoon, Los Angeles time, which is where she was phoning from, she was phoning a friend of mine to get my number. This is telepathy. There is no other way to describe this. It's not coincidence.
I just think if you believe you haven't got a sixth sense, you quite haven't arrived on the planet yet.
We'd be out, like with girlfriends and stuff, and I'd be stood at the bar, and all of a sudden a guy's name that was sat next to me in school would flash into my head, and I'd turn round and he'd be there, you know, behind me, and it was just silly little things like that. And I tried to kind of channel it to some kind of ability to use, but the more I thought about it, the less I was capable of doing it.
My dad and my sister, and I think my mother and myself, have always had a slight kind of psychic link, whether it be that situation, which probably everyone has been through, the situation where you pick up the phone and you ring someone, they go, oh, it's so weird, I was just thinking about you, I was sitting here next to the phone, I was just about to pick it up and ring you, and you ring me.
I did it with my brother the other day, and the most even more precision timing. I telephoned him, and before the phone rang, or just as the moment the phone rang, he was picking it up to dial me. And he said, hello? And I said, it was me. And he said, but I haven't rung you yet, I haven't dialed. I said, no, I'm ringing you. And he said, I mean, he had literally the split second extraordinary.
I've always experienced some kind of psychic relationship with my father all through my life. And my father was always the man that I called for when I was ill as a child, so the bond was very, very strong. But he has this uncanny and infuriating ability to know when I'm distressed. And I don't like telling my parents my problems. I never have told them anything. And he will phone up just as I'm in tears over something and say, "What's the matter?" And he's done that for the whole 40 years of my life, 44 years of my life, and I can't hide anything from him. I've now got to the point where I can say, "Mind your own business," but he knows if I'm distressed, and he's always known.
I know that my dad knew when his mother was having a heart attack. He woke up in the middle of the night and suddenly rushed round to his mother's house, who lived in the East End of London, and got there and found out that she was having a heart attack and called the police and, you know, saved her life in that regard. So it's, you know, quite amazing things like that. He never knew that. He always had a feeling about things, but it's things like that that just make you aware of the fact that there is definitely something going on here. And I think if you've got an open mind and you keep an open mind to it, then maybe it's easier to be like a sort of receptacle for people's thoughts and feelings.
This is an age-old pregnancy test. It's a crystal pendulum. Or if you need further confirmation, you can always just call Julie Peasgood.
I told my friend she was pregnant. I hadn't spoken to her for about 3 months. And she came on the phone and I said, "When's it due?" And she said, "Pardon?" And I said, "You're pregnant, aren't you?" And that was pretty tricky because she was indeed pregnant and hadn't told anybody because it was the lodgers.
I had an experience once, completely out of the blue, and it's why I don't drink anymore. I was heavily drunk in Manchester one night in a restaurant, and a voice came into my head and said, "Just tell that lady to paint her room any other colour but brown." And it was as clear as a bell. And I said this to the woman I was dining with, and the woman on the next table said, "My room's painted brown. I'm sorry, but I heard you say that." And I said, "Well, just paint it another colour." And I took her phone number and she took mine, and she phoned me a week later. She went back, painted the room white. Her boyfriend came back, dumped her, and it just happened that he was a pimp. And he was trying to get her in the business. He was so angry with her, he dumped her. The next day she got an offer of a job to become a horticulturist in Belgium, and she's never looked back. Where the hell did that message come from?
Elvis predicted his own death. It was nothing to do with his burger or drug intake. Oh no. He claimed he could see it in the clouds that passed overhead. Now I find I can do that after a couple of glasses of whiskey.
With premonitions, I think that we all have premonitions, but we choose to ignore them most of the time.
She'll know when something's happened, you know. She always gets these premonitions of things that are going to happen, and we always keep saying, you know, we must say it when we see it, and we started doing that now, and it's, you know, it's actually coincided that things have happened that we've seen.
I remember once I was in the car with Sam, and it was a dark night. We were on a windy road that we didn't know very well, out you know, away from where we live, and I just saw in my mind's eye a fox run across, and I swerved, and instead of not saying anything, I said it. I said, "Oh," I said, "Be careful, I've just seen a fox run across in my mind." And before I'd finished saying it, a fox ran across, and he did have to swerve to avoid it, and he was like, "You're a witch."
I have this kind of ability to see about 20 seconds, no, perhaps let's be more realistic, about 5 seconds into the future. And I believe this is purely animal telepathy. It's nothing to do with me, we all have it. And that is, I'm on a motorway approaching a corner, and I often get a voice saying, "Slow down." And that slowdown is either because there's a policeman with a speed camera around that corner, or there's an accident. And I think we all have this ability, a survival instinct, to see marginally into the future and sense danger.
We've had some American friends who live in Dallas, and they were over here last year in August and September, and their route back would have taken them via Boston, and they would have been on the Boston plane that went into the Twin Towers. And it was her, the wife. She had no idea what was going to happen, obviously, but she just felt she didn't want to travel. She felt that travel was not going to be safe, so they stayed in this country for an extra 2 weeks. So otherwise they would have been on that plane.